Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
All right, so today we're continuing a four-part series on trust. And so we're looking at four different topics. Two of them have to do with horizontal relationship, so our relationship with other people. And so we started the first week talking about trust in teams, like we're all on teams. How do we build and keep trust on teams? Last week we talked about trust for guidance, that God actually guides us in our lives. And then that's the vertical relationship. And then today we're actually going to look at trust in relationships. And then next week we'll talk about trust for provision. And so I think next week for you guys, a lot of times, just that one for next week, trust for provision for anybody. But a lot of times, guys, especially young guys, you get married and, it's like, okay, I gotta be provider. I gotta make it happen. I gotta do this. And it's just like, man, all the pressure. And when you start to realize as a person, male or female, that God is your provider, that as you surrender your life to him, he not just took your soul and caring for that, but he provides for everything for you. Like he's the one, your provider. So he's the provider. You're the one that is the steward of what he provides. It's pretty powerful stuff. So I encourage you to be here next week for that. But today, trust in relationships. In 2013, Raquel Cloutier's husband accidentally sold her $23,000 diamond ring for just $5 at a garage sale. True story. She was in the hospital to give birth to their child, and she had put the ring into a watch box because her fingers were swelling up, and she wanted to hide it from her twins that, got their hands on everything, I guess. But unaware that her husband had sold it, she came home and figured it out, and several days later, the people that had bought the watch box saw on the news their plea. Please bring it back, and it turns out they were neighbors, and it's cool that, the story, they ended up going to church together and built a friendship and everything else. So, but no person would intentionally trade a $23,000 ring for a $5 bill, would they? I mean, just no way. But trust in relationships is even more valuable than that ring, yet we trade trust almost every day for things that are not as valuable, don't we? Breaking trust is rarely about a calculated desire. In other words, it's not intentional, just like trading that ring. More often, it's a momentary lapse where, psychologists and neuroscientists, they call it our present self, where we're seeking dopamine, a thrill or relief, and that wins the tug of war against our future self. The one that has to deal with the consequences. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Oh man. I mean, on a small scale, it's like I shouldn't have eaten all of the ice cream, or I shouldn't have eaten, 3 more slices of pizza than I had. Now I'm up all night with indigestion. But there's bigger things in our lives where we break trust and we trade trust for something else. Trust is never just happens in a vacuum. You see, we always trade it for something else if we break it. Lisa TerKeurst says it so well in her book, I Want to Trust You, But I Don't. Trust is the oxygen of a relationship. When it's present, you don't even think about it. But when it's gone, it's the only thing you can think about. So another challenge for trust in relationships today is that we have like a disposable culture. The exit strategy has become a major default for relationships today. So ideas like ghosting people when the conversation gets uncomfortable, canceling people when they fail expectations, or opting out the moment the relationship becomes costly. So the good news is Scripture doesn't hide broken trust. We read it all the way from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. We see people breaking trust. We never see God breaking trust, but we see people do it. But in the midst of it, we see God not abandon people even when they do break trust with each other and then with God. And so God meets us in our need for trust, and he's really the one that we can really only trust. Right? I mean, he's the one that is really trustworthy. And it says of him, Psalm 145, verse 13, it says, the Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. So we can learn how to trust and be trustworthy from God because he is the trustworthy one. So we're going to look at Acts chapter 15, verse 36 or 38, and some other passages that have to do with it. And we're going to see a painful parting of ways. And then also the healing of hearts that comes after, where trust was broken. So Acts 15, verse 36, the context is Paul and Barnabas were two early Christians that trusted in Jesus. And they were right in the epicenter of everything that was happening after Jesus ascended to heaven in the early church. And God sent them out to share Jesus in different places in the world. And they had several different missionary journeys. They had their first, and then they went back and they were ministering at Antioch and other places. And then they're like, hey, let's go do it again. Like, let's go back out and let's encourage the people that we brought to Jesus on our first journey. But that's where things get rough, because there was something that happened where trust was broken on the first journey that prohibited them following through with their journey. And so verse 36 of chapter 15, it says, sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him, because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. So Paul and Barnabas are united in purpose, right? They're going to go back. They're going to encourage the people that they brought to Jesus. They're going to check up on them. They're true shepherds, right? They weren't just about a transaction of just bringing people to Jesus and yay, let's celebrate just that. No, they're going to go back and see, how are you doing in this walk with Jesus? Where are you at? And they're going to strengthen their faith. But the problem is they're disunified in their personnel. Like, who's going to go? Like, who's going to be a part of this team as we go? Verse 37, it says, Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, but Paul did not think it wise to take him. So John Mark had broken trust on their first missionary journey. Verse 38, it says that he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. One of the most painful things that happens to anybody in life is when we're deserted or we're abandoned. Abandoned would be taking it more personal. It becomes ingrained in us, where and a big problem for many of us is like in an abandonment, that we were all together and we're doing this together, and then you were gone. And sometimes it happens, in workplace, and man, my buddy that I talked to is gone now. Or sometimes it happens on a sports team, or, sometimes people move away and it's not even intentional and then sometimes in relationships, deeper relationships, sometimes fathers or mothers leave, their children when they're young, or sometimes parents divorce and they're not there emotionally for their children, and that causes something over generations and a hurt there. But they felt departed or abandoned by John Mark, and it changed the whole tone of their first trip, and now it's becoming a problem in this one. So John Mark, it appears that he was an avid runner, to put it nicely. In Mark chapter 14, verse 51 through 52, it says that there was a young man that when Jesus was arrested, was running in just his outer clothing, his tunic. And it was kind of, in those days, kind of like his underwear, like he was running. But then when they came to arrest him as well, they grabbed it and it came off, and then he was the first streaker. That's who they're talking about. He seemed to, like, whenever there was a scene or stuff going on, he's like, I'm out of here, so pretty interesting. But he was a younger guy at that point and still is. But in Acts 13, John Mark joins Paul and Barnabas on a missionary journey. And partway through, John Mark leaves and goes to Jerusalem. Acts 13, verse 13. We're not told why he does this, but it says, from Paphos, Paul and his companions sailed to Perga in Pamphylia, where John left them to return to Jerusalem. Now, we don't know the pressures that John Mark was under, but it could have been fear, or it could have been immaturity. It could have been discouragement, or it could be conflict, or he could have just been homesick. We don't really know. We're just given 5 strong words, which is he returned to Jerusalem. John left them and returned to Jerusalem. And so Dr. Henry Cloud says one of the pillars of trust is reliability. He says, doing what you say you'll do, even when it's hard. I mean, isn't that the person that we all desire to be? That we're just not reliable when it's easy, but we're also reliable when it's hard? I mean, aren't those the people that we love to work with and be in life with? Is that even when it's hard, this person is reliable. And so John Mark failed the reliability test, and he was a part of the team. He was supposed to be there for the long haul, and yet he took off. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever, don't raise your hand, but I mean, have you ever quit something? And I'm not talking about just like a job or, something, simple like that, but have you ever quit like something it has to do with like the substance of who you are, like your calling, like you didn't show up, or you let others down and, yeah, me too. I've been there for sure. Been there and it's a pretty sinking feeling, isn't it? Sometimes we don't realize in the moment, right? We don't realize what not showing up or quitting or not being reliable is doing to other people. But then if we take the time to actually process with people and think through what this does to them when we don't show up and how we're supposed to show up, it's a pretty big impact upon people's lives. And breaking trust is like the hike at Overlook number 9 at Sleeping Bear Dunes on Lake Michigan. And I was going to put up a picture, but I'm a little gun shy to put up pictures if they have copyright infringement. True story. We posted this thing like during COVID when everybody was posting, and there was this like banana picture. It's like, which ripe banana do you get? And somehow it was tied to some artist, and so like they came after us, and we had to pay money and all kinds of stuff. So anyways, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. But I was going to put the picture up, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing that again. So I couldn't find a picture. But look it up. You can find this Sleeping Bear Dunes, and it's just this massive 450-foot sand dune near Lake Michigan. And at lookout number 9, they have this sign, and it says steep cliff, hard, it basically says it's hard to get back up, and there's a $3,000 fine if they have to help you get back up, because it's so massive. And the deal is that it's very easy to get down, and everybody looks and says, no problem. I'm going to count the cost, $2,000 to $3,000. I won't need that. But every day almost, while it's open during this summer or spring, people are going down there. Every day almost, they have to rescue people. And it's quite a scene. It takes up to 10 people. And they have special equipment to be able to bring somebody up. Because, I mean, it's soft and all this. So it's just, but everybody says, no problem, I got this. I got it, I can do it. And I mean, isn't that like trust? Where we just say, you know what, I've kind of looked at this and yeah, but I want this. I'm just going to go ahead and do this. It's not a big deal. It won't make that big of a difference. And yet, in many times, it costs something great, just like this. So John Mark's quitting ripples beyond that painful moment. That's why Paul had to make a hard call later. That's why he's making a hard call right here, is that Paul and Barnabas have to part ways. See, we think many times like that breaking trust is like happens, it's isolated, that it just will affect maybe that moment, and maybe we can take care of it later. It's no big deal, and it's not going to affect other things. But many times when we break trust, it ripples. Sometimes breaking trust ripples for generations and generations and generations. And that's what's happening here is now Paul and Barnabas, 2 great friends, 2 great buddies and teammates in this mission. Now they are going to part ways because of what John Mark had done and the residue that's left over. And so the second missionary journey together becomes separate journeys as John Mark's broken trust continues to impact them. And what's even more difficult for us as people is that rebuilding of trust is not instant, right? Many of us have felt that, where we break trust and then we want things to just go back and be the way that they were. And yet the other person is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. you traded trust for something else in a moment or over a period of time, and now we need to take some time to rebuild this. And so verse 39 of chapter 15, it says, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So verse 39, it says they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. So these are two godly men, right? They're following after Jesus with all that they are. They've given up, they sacrifice. They're all in on the kingdom of God and the mission of Jesus. And they have two different assessments of John Mark, right? Barnabas leaned more towards encouragement. His name actually means like son of encouragement. That's a name for him. And also John Mark was family. So if you Colossians chapter 4, you see that John Mark was his cousin. So, I mean, he has more at stake here to make the right call with John Mark. But Barnabas was also very encouraging and accepting. Like, that's the way he was. And if you remember, in Acts chapter 9, Paul was one that actually persecuted Christians and actually stood by as the first martyr that we see, Stephen. In Acts chapter 6 and 7, we see Stephen martyred, and Paul stood there like affirming what was happening. But then he was on a road, and Jesus encountered him, and he surrendered his life to Jesus. But he was the one that would have Christians killed, and he was on his way to do stuff like that and persecuted. So the first disciples and apostles were like, wait, this guy's a Christian now? We don't believe it. And so when he came to Jerusalem, after a period of time of seeking the Lord, no one would talk to him. It's like, yeah, I'm going to just err on the side of this guy's trying to infiltrate us. But it was Barnabas who brought him to the apostles and like sealed things up. And he's like, no, it's authentic. This guy has come to the Lord. So Barnabas was that type of guy. I mean, anybody wants a Barnabas with them, especially if you've broken trust. Now, Paul leaned more towards the need for a new track record. If we went around the room, we probably would have a split room. Like, oh yeah, I'm a Barnabas. Yeah, right away. Let's give him a second chance right away. Let's go for it. Let's do that. And then others are like, nah, I need to see a new track record before we trust here. And so Paul had forgiven John Mark, but he didn't trust him yet, right? Forgiveness and trust are two different things. You see, as Christians, we should forgive freely because we've been forgiven by Christ. So forgiving freely. But then trust is earned through demonstrated change. We're not to trust freely, right? Trust is something that's earned. And so discernment in community is needed, and waiting over reinstatement hinges on the severity of trust broken and the level of a person's role in trust given. So in other words, the severity of how somebody broke trust, and then also the impact or height of their role in your life or within an organization or a church or a business really plays into it, right? So was it a small breaking of trust? Okay. But is their role really high? Well, if their role's really high and they have a small breaking of trust, you still want to let's have wisdom here. Like, let's really walk this through. If you have a big break in trust and a big role, then you really need to slow this train down. Because, right, people trust people. And so whether it's our spouses or whether it's people in our family or it's people in our workplaces, if trust is broken, it's something that you just don't rush out and just say, no big deal. Why? Well, because the person has to learn to become trustworthy again in that area. And then also the people that have had trust broken need to learn to be able to trust that person again. So there's lots of emotions and things that have to be walked through. And here's the thing. This all makes sense. Like, yeah, hold on. If trust has been broken and the person has a big impact upon my life or upon the organization or upon the church or the business or the country or whatever, we definitely need to take our time and like really walk through this and get all the different counsel together, right? We love that idea until it has to do with us, right? Until we're the one that broke trust and we're the one that has the role or the impact that we love, and we rush to get back to it, right? No, I'm good, people. I'm good. Let me back in. And we don't want this process walked through with us. But it's one of the healthiest things that we can do in our lives is to, if there's trust broken, to forgive, but then to say, okay, now let's establish new track records. That's always healthy for the people in our lives. And so forgive easily, but build trust over a period of time. It's not in an instant. But the good news in this case with these missions is that God is big enough to work through relational disagreements. And he's big enough in our lives too. Because what happens is now you have, instead of one second missionary journey, now you have 2 second missionary journeys, right? Barnabas takes John Mark, and Paul takes Silas. And then now you have 2 different journeys, and they're sharing Jesus and checking up on people and sharing. So isn't that like God? I mean, how many times have we made a mess of our lives or made a mess of situations, and yet God is still able to do something beautiful through it? And also, John Mark joins Barnabas for a second chance. That's the one thing I would say. If you are a John Mark today, and you look at in your personal life or your work life, and you've broken trust, and you want to make a comeback, is find a Barnabas. Find somebody that's encouraging, and find somebody that has a track record of trust and health in the area that you broke, and walk along with that person and go with them on a journey. Because that's typically how you can make sure that it's real what's happening. Because the problem is if we really want back to where we were before, we can fake it, right? We can fake it, and really, has it really gone deep enough that we now will not go back to what we did before? So the good news is that trust is rebuilt in a certain way, and there is a pattern. And so whether you've had somebody break trust on you, or whether you're the one that has broken trust, here's how it really happens, and we see it in John Mark's life. John Mark is not spoken of in Scripture for the next 10 to 12 years. So here he is, he's pretty active in the Gospels, pretty active in Acts, but in the progression of time, John Mark's not spoken of for 10 to 12 years. It doesn't seem like it many times, but a decade is a long period of time. It's a long period of time. And what he does is he goes off with Barnabas, and then there's silence. It doesn't say much. So there's no quick fixes for Mark or for us in our stuff, but it's quiet faithfulness where trust is rebuilt. So John Mark took Paul's no and he rebuilt trust. He was intentional with it. So how do we rebuild trust? Well, trust requires proven character, not promised intentions. So if someone has broken trust in your life, it's great if they can give a good speech. It's great if they can, say, well, this is what I intend to do. That's admirable. But it does not mean that trust should be restored to the level that it was there. What's needed is a proven character track record of a period of time. Dr. Henry Cloud puts it this way: trust is built with behavior that stays consistent over time. Lisa TerKeurst writes, a person who is truly sorry for breaking trust won't be defensive about the time it takes to rebuild it. So that's a red flag, that if somebody's broken trust in your life and you're kind of like, hey, slow your roll. I've forgiven you, but we're not going to end up right where we were before right away. We need to rebuild something. And if the person is just wanting to get back there and just like, come on. Let's get back. That's a red flag. They haven't let it sit deep enough into them to really rebuild in the spot that was broken. So here's where the story of John Mark gets beautiful. Years have passed by, and John Mark doesn't argue his case as far as we know. Like he's not always back with Paul. Come on, Paul, I'm better now. Come on, Paul, look at me now. Come on, Paul, I got it together. Let's do something together. We don't see that. He doesn't defend himself. He simply grows trustworthy. It's kind of like maybe on social media you see these things, at least I get them. I don't know, maybe they think I'm out of shape and you're not. But, it says, hey man, come away with us for 30 days and you'll be unrecognizable and do this workout. Anybody else get those? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm looking around people that raise their hands. You're also in very good shape. So, it's this thing but that's the idea is like pull away and work on yourself and then you'll be unrecognizable when they see you again. That's what John Mark does. He serves faithfully, eventually alongside Peter, which Peter and Paul, were like the top guys in all that God was doing during this time. And then slowly, quietly, trust is rebuilt. It's not flashy. It's not big speeches. He becomes somebody else. And then in chapter 4, verse 11, and we studied this in our study of 2 Timothy recently, it says that John Mark becomes helpful to Paul. Years later, Paul is in a cold, dark cell, and he's writing this letter to Timothy, his last letter that he wrote. And in the midst of it, you can almost see him crack a slight grin as he writes this about John Mark. He usually, I think, probably had a kind of a stern face. But as he writes this, I think that maybe a smile or a crack of a grin came because he says, only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in my ministry. The man that was once rejected is now requested, somebody has said. If you've broken trust today and it needs to be rebuilt, whether small or big, isn't that the beautiful story that you want? That, you'd go from the place that you were rejected to now requested? There's no other way besides just quietly rebuilding that character and that track record. But how did he get to helpful? He got there by being a man of his word for 10 plus years. He got there by buckling down and doing it. The trust that was blown in Pamphylia had been rebuilt, not with words, but with bricks of consistent, faithful action. So there's a way of doing this if we are the one that has had trust broken on us, or if we're the one that has broken trust. There's a way of doing this, and it's the way of learning from Jesus, who is the trustworthy one. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, and in him saying this, he's inviting those who've been hurt by trust broken by another and those who have broken trust to come close to him and learn from him. You see, the people he's speaking to had religious stuff loaded up on them. They had loaded up on themselves and yoked up with all sorts of performance things, and it's just an impossible way of living. And yet now Jesus says this to them and says it to all of us too. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Consider Jesus' work with John Mark. The man who once quit on the mission of Jesus is the man God later uses to write the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, amongst other themes, we see that Jesus' perseverance, his endurance, and his faithfulness all speak of the trustworthiness of Jesus. Only God could do that. That Jesus would work so deeply in this one that left the mission, that he would now use him to testify of his own faithfulness in his mission in his life. See, failure wasn't John Mark's final chapter. Faithfulness was. Trustworthiness was. And Paul, the man who once said no, was humble enough to say, "Bring him to me. He's helpful to me now. Only God could do that because he's a trustworthy one. I was trying to think through a real life story of something like this where trust was broken and then trust was restored. And I was reminded of, it's funny you guys are here today. I was reminded of a mentor and a pastor in my life, Mike McIntosh. And if you ever want to read his story, you find it on Amazon and other places. It says, For the Love of Mike, and it's about Mike McIntosh. But he and his wife Sandy were, hippies in the 60s and 70s and in Southern California, and he's from Oregon originally. But they got married and had kids, but Mike, doing all kinds of drugs and transcendental meditation, all sorts of things, and loses his mind literally. He walked around for a period of time thinking that he had a hole in the side of his head. He'd go out to the desert and seek UFOs and all sorts of things, and just was, really bailed on his family in lots of different ways. So they were divorced, and Mike would then show up at Sandy's house, and knock on the door and just like, hey, and let me tell you about this. But then it got to the point, a lot of times he couldn't even make sentences, but he'd knock on the door and she's trying to protect her kids and her family and, get up. She's like, stop coming here. Just stop coming here. But then she says, but then one day he knocked on the door and he says to me, he goes, hey, do you know about Jesus? And she's like, oh, come on. I went to church. I was in the choir. I went, all this stuff, and now you're going to talk to me about Jesus. And she's like, well, I did this stuff with you and this stuff, but don't try to lead me into this now. But then he kept coming back. And then finally he's like, hey, will you come to a concert with me? Or will you come to this thing? And she ended up going to one of the gatherings, if you've seen the movie Jesus Revolution, where, hundreds of young people were baptized at Pirates Cove in Orange County. And she was there, and she tells the story. She was in line. She's like, "What is going on?" And she's like, "Well, people are getting baptized." And this guy next to her says, "Hey, what are you doing?" She goes, "I think I'm going to get baptized." And he goes, "Well, are you born again?" She goes, "I don't know. You tell me." And they're in line, right? And then the guy goes, "Look, I've been a Christian for 3 weeks. I know exactly how to do this." And so he leads her to the Lord, and then she goes out there and get baptized. But I rewatched this video of this story to kind of remind myself, but it's just beautiful. I found this video of her talking about it, and she says like, man, I could not trust this man. He bailed on me, bailed on my family. I could not trust him. But then he shows up and he starts talking about Jesus. And then now I came to Jesus. And so she goes and knocks on the door of the house he was living in. And he comes down and answers. She goes, because she had just been baptized, just this powerful encounter with God. And she just goes, "You were wrong about everything else, but you were right about this." And then she walks away. And he's like, "Well, let's get back to you." She's like, "No way. Like, I'm not getting back together with you." But then she tells the story that she's driving down the road and she hears, "Behold, I make all things new." And she's like, "Is that the radio?" And she's hearing this. She turns it down, pulls over the side of the road, and she hears over and over again, "Behold, I make all things new." She's like, "What?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know. Is that scripture?" She doesn't really know. And then she opens her Bible and she reads Isaiah 43 and says, "Remember not the former things. I'm doing a new thing." And so God spoke to her, and then like a year later, she tells a story, like they get remarried. And she says, like, her dad was walking down the aisle and she's like, he was the only one that wasn't crying, She's like, he wasn't real happy. But she goes, I start to cry. And then I get up there and then Mike's crying and he's not a crier. And then Chuck Smith is crying, even though Chuck never cries. And the people leading the worship are crying and just this big thing. But the way she tells the story, it's powerful. She says, if I hadn't listened to God, she says, look, God would have blessed me and God would have still been in my life anyways. But because I allowed trust to be rebuilt and I trusted God, because God was telling her, like, look, I want you to remarry him. I want you to do this. I want you to trust me. Because of that, she says she would have missed out on 3 more children, 22 more grandchildren, and 11 more great-grandchildren. And then tells a story, like, the way God used them, like, in the world for Jesus is astounding. When I moved to San Diego, I was a part of their church, and their son-in-law discipled me as a teenager, and it's just astounding. Hundreds of congregations throughout the world, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people have come to Jesus through them. And it was kind of like this moment. God's like, hey, yes, you can go do this, but if you trust me and trust that I'm working in this, then you're not going to believe what I do. And so I haven't really thought about that story in a while, but I just think it's something that God may be speaking to several of us, saying, like, in some ways, those that have been hurt, the Lord's asking you to open up to someone that has built trust, But then two, some of us are walking around and we don't trust anybody. And we're missing out on all sorts of life. We're missing out on all kinds of things that God's doing. And so the basis point of all of this is that we trust the Lord. Yeah, don't go into a relationship. Don't live a relationship. Don't build a relationship. Don't do a partnership, a business, anything, unless you're trusting the Lord for sure. Because if you're not trusting the Lord, it's real hard to have a real good relationship in those things. It really is. It's a lot easier if you and the other people are trusting the Lord as well. And so be encouraged today. He will make all things new in your life. Even though there's something soiled and broken and you look at it, God can make something beautiful, beautiful, beautiful out of it and work in your life. So Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for your word. We thank you for who you are. And we're just blown away, Lord, at how you redeem and how you reestablish trustworthiness within us, God. For Lord, truth be told, we all are trust breakers. We've broken trust with you. We've broken trust with one another, Lord. And Lord, none of us stands like righteous or holy before you, Lord. None of us can say throughout their whole lives that we've handled every relationship and handed all trust given to us in a perfect way. And so, but God, we also don't want to be naive. And so, Lord, would you build our trust deep in you, the one that makes things new, that we might live out of that space, Lord. And Holy Spirit, I don't know if they're on that magnitude, but I pray that over our congregation and our people here today, that like Mike and Sandy, that you were able to rebuild because it was all by your power, Lord. Your power was able to transform two people that God, you would do something beautiful through. But it was broken, it was nasty, it was ugly. And Lord, would you come into the ugliness in our lives, the brokenness in our lives, and with your power, would you make those things new, God? Have your way in us, Lord. Have your way in us, God. Let's stand and worship together.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to vkcwest.com.